So we now move on to our keynote speaker. She is Dr. Nubia-Feliciano, and the title of her talk will be Education is a Process, Not a Commodity, which is something that's very dear to me, having spent much of my life in education and being the son of an elementary school teacher. Nubia-Feliciano holds a Ph.D. in education. She also holds a master's degree in counseling with an emphasis in student development in higher education. She teaches part-time for Chapman University at UC Irvine, where she instructs on such topics as leadership, ethics, race and ethnicity, and identity. She's the founder and CEO of the Colegas Group, a company that provides professional development and public speaking opportunities. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nubia-Feliciano.
Hello and welcome. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you today. That's my catchphrase, education is a process, not a commodity. It's a phrase that I came across a few years ago, a little over 10 years ago. Because for me, education is not about the piece of paper you receive at the end, because that doesn't tell anyone from someone you meet on the street to an employer what sort of educated person you are. It's how you bring that education to life. And that process of bringing it to life is that process of becoming an educated person. And that process of becoming educated doesn't necessarily have to happen in the four walls of the classroom, because life also has a way of giving you some pretty long-lasting lessons. So how you then process through those and integrate them into who you are is a process of becoming an educated person as well. So when I came across that phrase, it really was something that helped bring together a lot of the beliefs that I have about education. Teachers are my heroes, so every time I run across someone who's the child of a teacher, I know they've come through a particular process and a unique life experience, a unique upbringing, sort of, because it's hard to turn off being a teacher. So, I mean, my children know this for first-hand knowledge. I have a 12 and an almost 14-year-old. So, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and speak about what I wanted to speak about today, which is why we must act. It's vital. And thank you again for the invitation for this afternoon. I feel very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. And as we commemorate Women's Equality Day, which is tomorrow, I'm going to talk with you about why we must act. It involves engagement with such movements as the feminist movement, both in the U.S. and abroad, and grassroots movement, both in the United States and abroad. It also requires us to understand why coalition building is vital. It is why it matters today. I hope to motivate the next generation of leaders to act on their convictions, so it's important that this sort of event is happening on a university campus, being co-sponsored by a student organization. I hope to motivate you to find your own purpose, get informed, and mobilize to action for the common good. Thank you to the Iranian Circle of Women's Interpersonal Network, and especially Sudi Burkania, for the invitation to share my ideas about why it's important that we have a Women's Equality Day and how this impacts political action. So my talk today is about why we must act. I open with a quote from Howard Zinn: "You cannot be neutral on a moving train. The present circumstances obligate us to get off the sidelines and do something. Disengagement and apathy are not an option. The personal is political. You must learn to articulate your own journey so that you can contribute to the larger narrative of the human story. If you do not, others will write you into their story, and you may not like the part that's been written for you to play. Part of my story is to make education my method of engagement in critical conversations, modeling best practices, and putting myself in spaces where people like me are often left out. Other speakers on the panel focus on efforts on reproductive justice, voting rights, and gender equity. All three work to address women's equality from different perspectives. This is why we're here today. This generation of women and men are being called to engage with and move the needle along these very important social issues. These issues are those that our mothers and grandmothers fought for, and sadly these are the same issues still facing us today. You must act so that we can ensure that we take more steps forward than back. It's important that you understand your role in this social experiment that is the building of the United States of America. You have a role to play, a purpose to live out, and a movement to maintain. You are being called to act. Why we must act? Because there are those who espouse extreme positions and use emotion to divide and control. I urge women to resist the influence of those who seek to divide and control you. Don't be distracted by the blame game, the scapegoating, and the shock tactics. Don't get dragged along by those who want to control what you see and hear. Don't get caught in an echo chamber. Your role is to find areas where we can work together towards resolving an issue that will benefit the many, not just the few. You have a choice to take the high road and build bridges along the way. It can be a more difficult road and often a lonely one, but along the way you will find like-minded people who will accompany you on your journey. The high road is a path that creates lasting monuments to your individual and collective efforts. In your actions, lead with compassion. Compassion forces us to drop our defenses and exposes our vulnerabilities. It forces us to engage with each other at a deeper level and risk trusting others with what we hold close to our hearts. It requires us to be authentic. This is scary and risky, but I believe not being authentic makes progress much harder to achieve. Today's awardees of panelists are being recognized for their efforts that can only be called compassion, but to action. Why we must act? Because the issues requires us to use the skills of diplomacy to keep everyone at the table talking. We must insist that we all sit on the same side of the table together and look at the problem, identify its contours, and find a solution that we all mostly agree on. Don't be forced to sit on opposite sides. This stance stalls progress. Finding a middle way, a common ground, and work to see the world through other people's eyes. Our current social climate requires that we work to find and maintain our very real human connections. And we cannot do anything alone. Why we must act? Because as women, within us is a diversity of thought and perspective, a diversity of what is believed to be prudent or revolutionary, a diversity of ideas on what is the best course of action. Democratic values demand that we take our time and listen to all voices. The democratic process demands that we work to find mutually beneficial solutions so that no one is left behind. We must uncover our biases towards others in our midst so that we can own up to our own prejudices and keep us from truly listening and valuing each other. Through diversity is strength. We must acknowledge this scientific fact and use it to move our movement forward. Why we must act? Because we're being called to do better than the generation before. My children are 12 and almost 14. They will require that we do better for them. Our children rely on all of us to learn from our predecessors and answer the call to lead. Every generation has an obligation to move our society forward. It is our turn, and I'm holding us accountable, to work towards creating a different way to engage with those who at first glance may not agree with us. Why we must act? Because the future requires us to get involved now. In my role as a professor, I tell my students they do not have the option to sit this out. This democracy will only be maintained through our civic engagement. Oftentimes we feel overwhelmed by what we see and hear on the news and on social media. This is normal because we are all shown the problems with no way of doing anything about them. Where do we begin to address issues like climate change, homelessness, human trafficking, disparity in pay, or reproductive rights? I suggest that you pick an issue, one that resonates with you, and learn all that you can about it. Figure out where you can contribute and plan and implement a lasting resolution. You are not responsible for taking on the whole issue. Just a small part of it that you can manage at this point in your life. Do what you can, however you can, for as long as you can. It is then the responsibility of the next generation to pick up where you left off. and continue the work. Become their example, just like others were for us. Why we must act? Because meaningful change comes when you act together in concert with others to keep the momentum going on the accomplishment of previous generations. I am sick and tired of the divisive talk, the yelling, the insults, the arguments that seem to go in circles and resolve nothing. I am sick and tired of the attacks on education. It is my chosen profession and method of activism. It is only through education that we learn about our individual and collective histories, about what was done before and what we can do now. Education is the bedrock of a democratic society. Attacking it is attacking the very foundation of our democracy. Anti-intellectualism is the enemy of progress. We must continue to inform ourselves, develop plans of engagement, leave no one behind, and understand that our destinies are interconnected. We must succeed in making this democracy better. Future generations are hoping we leave them a roadmap with which they can continue on their own journey. Why we must act? Because regardless of the issues facing us, we must persist. We've all heard the quote, "Nevertheless, she persisted." This is a quote stated in 2017 by Senator McConnell on the Senate floor in reaction to Senator Elizabeth Warren not yielding during a confirmation hearing debate. Senator Warren read a letter from Coretta Scott King, written in 1986, opposing Jeff Sessions' confirmation as a federal judge at the time. Ms. King felt he lacked the temperament, fairness, and judgment to be confirmed. Senator Warren used this letter in 2017 as evidence to oppose the confirmation of Jeff Sessions as Attorney General of the United States. Nevertheless, she persisted, became the rallying cry of the feminist movement in these times. This summer, I took time to read some books on tape. I'm in the car a lot, so I love reading, having books read to me. One that stood out to me the most was The Librarian of Auschwitz. In this story, a young 14-year-old woman named Dita Kraus, whose job was to protect the books that were smuggled into the Auschwitz concentration camps during World War II. The library was part of the family camp and consisted of 8 books, as well as a handful of living books, or people who knew books so well that they could recite them from memory. It was a crime to have a library in the camps. At one point, Freddie, one of the people in charge of the library, told Dita, "Brave people are the ones who can overcome their own fears." In the face of trauma and devastation that Dita witnessed, nevertheless, she persisted. Be brave in the face of your own fears, and know that you are not alone in this fight. Thank you again for allowing me to speak. The people being honored or being recognized or being part of this panel truly embody the mission of ICWIN's organization: inspire advocacy, educate and unite against all forms of violence, and collaborate to express a collective voice. I hope that you figure out what your role will be in the grand experiment to create a more perfect union. Please act. Please vote. Our collective future depends on it. Thank you.
Sisters went to play and danced to golden rays of sunshine. Her lips still held the kiss of sweet red wine.